And three, two, one. All right, and we are back. And today we're back with something a little bit different. This one is going to be a little bit scary for some of the more, squeamish audience members out there. This one is a video from a really great creator named MrBallen. And obviously he's wearing a button up, so I'm going to wear a button up. That's how it works here. But guys, if you want to wear a button up, please like, comment, and subscribe, and also put on a button up. That's how YouTube works. And yeah, this guy, he makes a lot of great these really kind of like creepy pasta type videos, if you're familiar with those. Pretty much internet stories, horror stories from the internet. Or real life. I don't know if this one's going to be like something that's real or something that's more fictional, but I feel like this is going to be like a real life, like something actually happened in this one. So yeah, this is going to be strange, dark, mysterious stories, and I'm ready for this one. So guys, if you don't want something strange and dark and mysterious to happen to me, because YouTube's right over there, please like, comment, and subscribe, or else they will. Fiery crashes, dark secret revealed in a Taco Bell? Taco Bell?
In the fall of 2004, an undercover police officer in Texas was standing in line inside of a fast food restaurant when he turned around to scan the room. Now, he acted like he was just kind of nonchalantly looking around, kind of people watching, the way people do when they're waiting in lines. But he really wasn't doing that. In reality, what he was doing was taking a quick glimpse of two people eating by the window inside of this restaurant that he had been following all day that day. But when he took this quick glimpse of these two people, he noticed something totally bizarre that he had not caught earlier in the day. And as soon as he saw it, the hairs in the back of his neck stood up, and almost unconsciously he reached down and put his hand on his concealed gun underneath his shirt, and then he tapped his partner, who was also undercover, right next to him, and then the two of them walked straight over to the two people. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of these
I want to know more about this story. Come on, let's get to the
strange,
story,
dark, and
man.
mysterious, delivered in story format.
Don't do me like this, man. You got me all hyped up, and then you tell me the story's coming. Like, you're in the middle of the story.
Then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, on the next very hot day, take the like button out to a public park, and as soon as they need to use the bathroom, point them in the direction of a porta-john, and then when they go inside, immediately wrap it up in saran wrap, and then push it over. Also, please subscribe to our channel.
Okay, that was a long analogy for like, comment, and subscribe. So I feel a little bit better about the ones that I do now. So guys, next time you see one of my videos and you see that like button, make sure you grab it, you put it in a headlock, and you give it a nuggie. Every time you give it a nuggie, that's you hitting a like. So like, take it like I'm doing the mic, and just like do like that to it, But like, that's just you pressing the like button.
Channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
MrBallen, dark and mysterious. He should do basketball content, I'll be honest.
On the evening of June 17th, 2004, a 21-year-old woman named Molly Daniels pulled into the driveway of her little home that she shared with her husband and two kids in suburban Texas. It had been a long day for Molly at the home remodeling business where she worked as a receptionist, and so now that she was home, the last thing she wanted to do was go inside and make dinner for her family. And so, after turning off her car, Molly just sat there in the driveway for a couple of minutes, just zoned out looking out the window. But eventually, she kind of snapped out of it, she gathered up her things, she got out of the car, and she made her way up to the front door. And as soon as she stepped into her home,
we all get that feeling sometimes where you're just like, yo, I just need a minute. Let me go smoke a cigarette or, whatever substance that you choose at that moment. And let me just get away before I just need a deep breath before I go in and have to interact with these people. The people that I love.
Bad mood she was feeling from work was wiped away and replaced with happiness, because the first thing she heard the second she was in her home was the sound of her 4-year-old son, Caleb, hysterically laughing. And so Molly walked into the
Okay.
back room and she found her son, along with her husband, Clay, rolling around on the ground, tickling each other. And next to them was their 1-year-old daughter sitting on the rug, laughing as well and clapping and watching along. And so as soon as Molly walked into the room, Clay, who was underneath Caleb, stopped for a second and grinned up at Molly. Molly smiled back, and then Clay and Caleb went back to wrestling, and the 1-year-old continued to laugh and play along. And so Molly suddenly felt so content with her life. It was so incredible to have a family of her own. And so, with a big smile on her face now, she headed off into the kitchen to make dinner. Life had been tough financially for the Daniels family recently.
Okay.
The city where they lived, called Leander, was located just north of Austin, Texas.
Hey, that's a nice little area right there. That's the suburbs. Now, what you won't notice here are public transportation, like a local store or like way to get groceries outside of driving around a long distance. They're kind of trapped within the suburbia that they live in.
And it was getting more and more expensive every single year. Clay, who was 2 years older than Molly, he was 23, he was a mechanic, but he had been out of work for months, and so he had just been staying home with the kids. As for Molly, she had her job as a receptionist, but it paid very little, and so ultimately the family was just barely scraping by. But despite the financial...
How do you survive off of like 2 kids? You got 4 people in the house. What about 4 people in the house you got to make sure to take care of? Off of one income alone is like crazy. And again, like you mentioned, I don't think secretaries get paid a whole lot. That area looked pretty expensive.
Financial hardship they were under, Molly was so thankful that she had a husband in Clay that was so good with their kids, especially Caleb, the 4-year-old son, because Caleb was actually Molly's son from a previous relationship, and she was worried that maybe Clay wouldn't necessarily treat him like his own, but Clay had totally stepped up to the plate and become Caleb's father, and Caleb definitely viewed Clay as his dad, and so that
Shout outs
relationship
to
was as
Clay.
close as if they were biologically related. And so Molly just felt so grateful for that. That evening, the family sat down and had dinner together, and then afterwards, Molly and Clay got the kids off to bed, and then Molly and Clay stayed up and watched TV together. But after a while, Molly said she was tired and she was going to go to bed. Clay said he'd be staying up for a bit longer, and so the couple kissed, said goodnight, and Molly made her way upstairs. At around 10:45 p.m. that night, so about 15 minutes after Molly went upstairs, she was laying in bed, drifting off to sleep, when she heard the sound of their front door open and then shut, and then she heard the sound of their car being turned on and leaving the driveway. Now, this was not a big deal for Molly because earlier that night, Clay had mentioned kind of offhandedly that he wanted to go see his mom that night, that he might swing over there and say hello. He had a couple of paperback books that he wanted to give her, and so Molly knew there was a chance he could be doing that, and so she assumed that had to be what she was hearing, and so she forgot about it and fell asleep. The next morning, when Molly woke up at 6 a.m., she rolled over and she saw Clay was not in bed with her. Now, she wasn't immediately...
Whoa, that's a little suspicious. How long does it take to deliver books? What time were you even going over there to deliver books, bro? This story is, it's a little suspicious.
alarmed by this because it wasn't unusual for Clay to get up really early. And so Molly climbed out of bed, she made her way over to the window, and she looked down at the driveway, expecting to see their car back, meaning Clay would be downstairs somewhere. But she looked in the driveway, there was no car. And so suddenly feeling kind of panicked,
That's a nice
Molly
driveway,
went
y'all.
downstairs and looked
That
around
is a
the
nice
house.
driveway.
Clay wasn't there, and so she picked up the phone and she called Clay's mother. And when Clay's mother picked up, Molly said, "Hey, is Clay with you? He said he was stopping by last night. I heard him leave. Is he with you?" And Clay's mother would say, "No, he's not here. And in fact, I didn't even know he was going to be stopping by last night. I haven't heard from him." The drive from Molly and
It ain't looking good for Clay. I'll tell you that right now. It is not looking good for your boy Clay. I said shout outs to Clay. Like, you know, raising another dude's kid is a big responsibility, and it takes a real man to step up and do that. And now he's over here. I hope he ain't over here cheating. Come on, Clay.
in Clay's house to Clay's mother's house was 40 miles of twisting, fairly dangerous highway. Now, Clay regularly made this trip to and from his mother's house, and so Molly was never that worried about him going on this 40-mile stretch. But suddenly, without saying it, both Molly and Clay's mother were thinking the same thing. Did Clay get into a car accident last night on the drive to his mother's house? And so at some point, Clay's mom on the phone tells Molly to stay calm, stay at the house with your kids. I'm going to get in the car. I'm going to drive the route that Clay would have taken back to you, and we'll see if we can find him. And then as soon as the two women hung up, Clay's mother ran to her car. She jumped inside, she turned it on, she peeled out of the driveway, and began speeding those 40 miles back towards Clay.
Shout outs to mom. You know, that's what real good moms do. They just stop whatever they're doing. They get out there, they do what they need to do.
Molly's house. And she had only gotten about halfway along this trip when up ahead she saw all these flashing blue and white lights. She saw crime scene tape across the whole road. This was a section of the highway that was heavily forested on either side, and she could see traffic was backed up very far on the other end and as well on her side. And so of course Clay's mother is thinking, this is my son, he's been in an accident right here. And so she pulls over to the side of the road, she throws it in park, she gets out and runs to the nearest police officer and begins frantically asking them, what's happened here, what's happened? And as she's talking to the officer, she notices behind him there's all this smoke coming up from the forest. There's a fire down in the forest. And so she's craning her neck to look down and see what it is. And the officer tried to stop her, but finally she pushed past him and she looked and she saw there was a car on fire that clearly had flown off the road. And so in a total panic, she begins asking the officer, do you know who it is? Is it my son? Is it Clay? The officer told her to please calm down. We have no idea whose car this is. We're trying to figure it out. The fire department hasn't even put the fire out yet. We don't know enough to tell you anything.
This ain't looking good
at this
for Clay.
point, Clay's mother could not wait any longer for answers. And so she turned around, she ran back to her car, she hopped in it, and she made her way around this big police barricade and sped the rest of the way to Clay and Molly's house. And there, she picked up Molly, she drove her back, and when they got there, both women are totally hysterical, but they run right up to the police tape, and they look down in the direction of where this fire had been, which now had been put out. There was just smoke coming off of this car frame that had been totally burned out. And immediately, when Molly looked down there, she recognized the car. Or I should say, she recognized the shape of the car, because the fire had totally eviscerated the car. But Molly, she was seeing the frame.
Jeez, that's heartbreaking. I'll be honest, that's devastating. Just
was about
like
the right
losing what? Stop it! Losing the father of your children like that. That's sad. I didn't mute you.
Strewn around this burned out car were all these paperback books that had been burned up partially in this fire. And she knew that Clay had likely been on his way to his mother's house with all these paperback books inside of the vehicle. And so she knew this had to be Clay. And at the same time that Molly is having this horrible realization, the fire department down below was able to actually get into the burned out vehicle. They opened up the door and they found right away there was a body in the driver's seat. And so between the size of the body, all the paperback books that Molly said, you know, that would be something Clay would have, along with several other personal effects that were found inside of the car, like Clay's prized Harley Davidson pin that he always wore in his hat, it was obvious that this was Clay. When word spread about Clay's death, Molly's neighbors and friends in Leander jumped into action. People loved Molly in Leander. She was this very sweet, very kind woman who was a little bit socially awkward, but they had found ever since she had married Clay, she had really found some more confidence and just seemed happier. And so it was totally devastating to see Clay be pulled from her life like that. And so very quickly, the community in Leander raised $1,000 and they gave it to Molly and her kids. And then also neighbors began dropping off food and stocking their fridge with groceries. And even though Molly couldn't even eat, she was so grief-stricken from the loss of Clay, she still very much appreciated the effort that people were making to comfort her. But as the community rallied around Molly and her kids to get them through this difficult time, the police were starting to ask some questions about how exactly this crash that had killed Clay actually happened. Because there were some oddities about the scene of the accident. The biggest being, there were no skid marks on the road, which meant Clay had not hit the brakes before swerving off the road and crashing down in the trees below. And secondly, they didn't really understand how the fire that had started after this crash had gotten so incredibly hot that it basically had completely melted away every part of the vehicle save for the frame, and also Clay's body had been totally destroyed. I mean, the authorities had seen fires after car accidents, but nothing like this. This looked very unique. And so investigators...
So, do they think somebody like killed him and then put the car there and then set the car on fire? Why would somebody do this? What did Clay do? What's his history? Like, what's going on
started
with
to
Clay?
wonder if they were really dealing with a car accident or if this was a murder. And on June 22nd, just 4 days after Clay was found, investigators would learn from the crime lab that their suspicions had been correct. We did a merch drop last year, and the gear was awesome. We were so happy with it, but the shipping
talking about his
times
merch
were
now.
ridiculously long. We had big shipping issues.
I
fixed
appreciate
so
it.
as a
Everybody, make sure you go ahead and check out MrBallen. Check out MrBallen merch. Get 50% off. You know, he's got a promo code. It's everything's 50% off while supplies last. You don't even need a promo code. I thought you needed a promo code. You don't even need one. Mr. Ballen's got you. You'll be balling with the MrBallen.com gear. But yeah, back to it.
It would turn out there was lighter fluid found all over the front seat of the car, so that was the reason the fire had gotten so big. And then during the autopsy, Clay's lungs showed that he had not ever inhaled any soot.
Oh, he was
meaning
already dead.
he was dead when the fire started. And so very likely, Clay was murdered and the car accident was staged. And interestingly, when word started to get out in town that Clay's death seemed suspicious and that maybe he was murdered, it turned out nobody was surprised. Because even though Molly adored Clay and thought he was a great father, most other people in Leander hated him. He was known around town to be this totally short-tempered guy who would just pick fights with people out.
I'll be honest. Clay looks like he has a little bit of a temper. He looks like he'd be like a big fan of like wrestling, like WWE. Like I feel like if you, I don't want to criticize Clay too much, but I will say he looks like he knows a lot about wrestling. And yeah, I can see a guy like this being a little short tempered. You know, he's a Harley Davidson fan, and you know, I'm sure he has a motorcycle and does that stuff, and maybe, you know, like short sleeve or rips off his shirt, the sleeves on his shirt. You know, these aren't things that mean that anything bad. You know, it's just when you put them all together, people start to like create a stereotype in their mind. It may not be a positive one.
Out of the blue. In fact, at Clay's own funeral, his literal best friend stood up to eulogize him, and during this, he said, "I think honestly, the world is a better place without Clay." And so,
what? Bro, what did bro, oh my gosh. If anybody ever says some stuff like that at my funeral, I'm coming back as a ghost. I will haunt you. I'm telling you right now, if anybody says something like that at my funeral, like, oh man, world's better off without him, that's wild. That's crazy. You know, this guy's mom is sad. His wife or his girl, she's sad as far as I'm aware as of this point in the video. 10 minutes from now, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this whole situation.
So investigators began looking into Clay's background to see if they could find connections with people that might have a grudge or some reason to be mad at Clay who might want to do him harm. And very quickly, investigators found something. Just 10 days before Clay was found, he had pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting a 7-year-old girl. But the...
Okay, yeah, guys. Anything I said about Clay has now been redacted. I don't associate with Clay. I don't, you know, Clay. Hey, it had to happen to somebody, I guess. You know, maybe the world is a better place without you, Clay. Sorry to say this. The best friend was right. Now, did the best friend know about this? Because let's talk about the best friend here. How you gonna be his best friend if you know about this? You know, maybe he didn't know. Maybe he just found out, and it's like, this wasn't my best friend. I thought he was my best friend, but honestly, the world's a better place without him. Uh, Jesus Christ! I thought it was gonna take me like a few minutes to realize that Clay wasn't a good guy. I didn't realize that it was immediate. I didn't know he was about to immediately drop the bomb that Clay needs to be burning in hell and being like literally. Oh my gosh! What the? How was he out? How was he not in jail? Why was you? She pleaded guilty to that, and you let him be around your children. What the? Oh my
Sentence he
god!
received was incredibly light. He was given 30 days in jail, which he had not served yet, and probation. Now,
30 days in jail that he hadn't served yet. What? 30 days, 30 years in jail immediately, starting the moment that they say that. What is happening? What is our justice system going? What is happening with our justice system? Like, realistically, you can't, like, this guy gets 30 days in probation. You know, let somebody be out there doing something like, you know, you send your kid to a different school, you know, then that's outside of your school district, and you're likely to get more time than that. Like, what is going on here?
the father of the victim, the 7-year-old girl, was absolutely furious about Clay's light sentence. And in fact, just a couple of days before Clay died, the father threatened to kill Clay. So investigators quickly...
Shout outs to that father. You know, where is he now? I don't know yet. But free that guy. Free that father.
Tracked down this father, and then they brought him in for questioning. But very quickly, this father made it clear to police that yes, he hated Clay. Yes, he had threatened to kill Clay. But no, he had nothing to do with what happened to Clay. And the father had an alibi to back that up. And so, after confirming his alibi, the police somewhat reluctantly allowed the father to leave, even though to a lot of them, he just really seemed like the slam dunk primary suspect, but he couldn't have been. And so with him out of the picture, the police were kind of back to the drawing board. And so they decided they would actually go talk to Molly and see if maybe she could shed some light on who else might have wanted to hurt Clay. Now, in their previous conversations with Molly...
I'll be honest, I'm kind of looking at Molly a little differently now. Like... Come on, Molly. You really letting this dude around your kids and stuff? Like, you just, even if, like, just leave him. He ain't even got no job or nothing. It's not like you you supporting him, and he's like a freaking, you know, like this dude's over here doing stuff to kids and shit. Like, come on now. Come on, Molly. Do better for yourself. Or at least do better for your children. Jesus. Come on now.
Molly, police found her to be incredibly polite and also at the same time very
polite
upset
stuff,
about
whatever.
the death of her husband. But this time, when investigators showed up at Molly's house and she brought them into her kitchen where they sat down to talk, it was like the police got a totally different Molly. And it happened as soon as they asked her, you know, hey, who do you think could have hurt your husband? It was like Molly suddenly became impatient. She didn't have time for these questions. And finally, she just said, you know what? I think Clay was depressed because he had that prison sentence that was coming up that he didn't want to serve. And so probably he just killed himself. I think that's what happened. And so now I need you guys to leave. And so the officers didn't make a fuss. They didn't fight Molly on this. They just got up, they left. But once they were back out in their car, they looked at each other and they both agreed that Molly's behavior was very suspicious, and it made them think, you know, maybe she actually knows more about what happened.
She definitely knows more. We got an investigator. Get her, boys.
To Clay, and she's kind of trying to cover it up and make the police go away. And over the next couple of weeks, as police began investigating Molly, they discovered quite a bit of evidence that made them even more suspicious of her. For one thing, there was Clay's $110,000 life insurance policy that Molly was entitled to, and Molly had apparently been calling the insurance company nearly non-stop every day, trying to get them to wire that payment as soon as possible. And Molly apparently was telling people in town how excited she was about getting that money. Also, police learned after talking to Molly's neighbors that Molly was starting to date again already, just 3 weeks after her husband has died. She's out there on the dating scene, even bringing home one of her boyfriends and having him live with her 2 kids. And according to Molly's babysitter,
Bro, Molly, have you not learned? You immediately just let some other dude in and start being around your children? Vet these people first. Like, jeez, oh my gosh.
this
You can't teach some
new
people.
boyfriend that was coming into the house was really upsetting Caleb, the 4-year-old, who had been so close with Clay. The babysitter would say that Caleb, who normally was a very mellow child back when Clay was still alive, was now very violent and emotional, and periodically he would just stop, look up into the sky, and scream, "I love you, Daddy!" But when the babysitter brought this up to Molly and said, really, you should get your son
he
some
might just
help
be
here,
sad.
Molly got angry and said Caleb was fine, it was none of her business.
Nah, that kid needs therapy. That kid needs therapy immediately. And I'm not the person that says everybody needs therapy. That kid needs therapy.
And then she slammed the door on the babysitter. But despite how suspicious Molly now seemed, there wasn't any real evidence that actually linked her to Clay's death. And so finally, in the fall of 2004, so several months after Clay's death, and still the police have not figured out who killed him or how he died and how he wound up in this inferno by the side of the road, they decided to kind of reinvigorate this investigation into Molly. They really wanted to find evidence that she was involved in Clay's death. And so they decided to put a surveillance team on Molly 24/7. And at first, the undercover police would report that Molly's behavior was incredibly routine. She basically did the same things every single day. She got up, she got the kids out the door, she went to work. Afterwards, she picked her kids up from the babysitter, she went home, she fed her kids, and then they all went to bed, and they did it all again the next day. The only deviation from her schedule was periodically she would go out after work to run some errands, like go to the grocery store. But then on December 3rd, so 6 months after Clay was found, Molly would finally break her routine. On that day, Molly, on her way home from work, made a pit stop in this parking lot near several local stores. So she parked her car, she got out, but then instead of walking into one of these stores to run an errand or something, she walked to a dark-colored Mustang that was parked in the parking lot as well, and a guy was driving it. This guy the cop didn't recognize, with dark hair. Molly walked up to him and began talking to this guy through the window, and then at some point, Molly began very suspiciously looking over her shoulder like she was trying to see if anyone would...
Is Molly buying weed? Is Molly trying to buy some weed or some other type of drugs? That seemed like a drug deal.
Watching her, and then she walked around and climbed into the Mustang with this guy. She shut the door, and then the two of them drove off together. And so the undercover police officer followed after them. And eventually, the Mustang containing Molly and this guy pulled into the parking lot of a Taco Bell, a fast food restaurant. And so they stopped, they got out, and the undercover officer watched as the two of them casually walked inside of the Taco Bell. They ordered some food, and they sat down by the window to eat. And so by this point, the undercover officer, he's not seen anything incriminating happening here, but what he's seeing is such a break from her routine that it just seemed really suspicious, and he wanted to go inside and have a look. And so he called for backup from another undercover officer who was part of the surveillance team. He came into the parking lot, and then the two of them, these two officers who are wearing plain civilian clothes, they both got out of their unmarked vehicles, and they casually walked into the Taco Bell, and they got in line to order food. And as they were standing in line, one of the undercover officers casually turned around in line and very nonchalantly scanned the room, like he was looking at nothing in particular. But in reality, what he was doing was taking a quick glimpse at Molly and this guy she was with. And when the officer took this quick glimpse, he noticed something very strange about the guy that Molly was sitting with. Something that the officer hadn't seen before, but now that he was up close, he could see it. And as soon as he saw this strange thing, The officer tapped on his partner's shoulder like, all right,
Tell me what it is.
we're doing something here.
Come
The
on.
officer reached down, put his hand on his concealed gun underneath his shirt, and then he walked across the restaurant, not even pretending to be undercover at this point. He's basically giving away that he's a cop. He strode right over to their table, and when he stopped in front of them, Molly and the guy she was with both looked up at him in surprise, and the officer just stared down at the guy. Not at Molly, just at the guy. The strange thing the officer had caught when he looked over at the guy was that he recognized him. This was someone he knew personally from being in law enforcement in the area.
I thought it was going to be like the freaking severed head or something. Bro, if you don't stop blue balling me.
This guy was Clay Daniels, Molly's
What? Wait, he faked his own death and then to avoid. What? Oh my God. Oh my gosh. This was a mystery. This mystery was this was a good video. This is a good video. This is a good video because I did not see that coming. I didn't see it coming, you know. Oh, I hate this dude, Clay. I hate you, Clay.
supposedly dead husband. He had just clearly dyed his blonde hair black. It would turn out Molly and Clay had staged his death in order to keep him from having to serve that prison sentence for the sexual assault charge, and so they could collect on the $110,000 life insurance policy. The body that was found inside of the burned out car was obviously not Clay's. It was the body of an 81-year-old woman who Clay had dug up from some isolated cemetery, thrown inside of his vehicle, and then pushed his vehicle off the road and lit on fire with lighter fluid. And so that was why there was no skid marks up on the road, because again, this was not a car accident, it was staged. And so after
You dug up an innocent old woman's body and used her to cover up your crime. Bro, this dude Clay, put him under the jail. Put him and her. Put them in jail immediately.
Clay and Molly
Oh my
staged
God.
Clay's death, it actually worked. People really believed that Clay had died. They were questioning how he died, but nobody really thought it wasn't Clay. And so their plan was working. But after 3 weeks of being apart, with Clay kind of hanging out by himself away from the town, Clay and Molly just couldn't stand to be apart any longer. And so Clay dyed his blonde hair black. That was the only thing he did to disguise his identity. And then he just moved back into the home with Molly and the kids. And so that was the new boyfriend that neighbors were seeing Molly with. She was not actually going out on new dates. She was just back with Clay. And Clay's stepson?
Now, some people say that Asian people look alike, and some people say that black people look alike. But just being able to dye your hair one color and then completely keep going on with your life, I feel like that says something.
Caleb, the 4-year-old, he immediately recognized that his father was back, even though he had black hair. But Molly and Clay had convinced the little boy that Clay was not really Clay. Instead, this was the new boyfriend, Jake. This is very likely why Caleb had begun acting out. He was old enough to understand that something wasn't right, but not old enough to understand that his parents were lying to him. It's unclear why Molly and Clay, who lived together shamelessly, decided to have this weird rendezvous in the parking lot inside of Clay's Mustang and then go to Taco Bell and eat together. But regardless, it was this secret meetup that ultimately led to them getting caught. Molly and Clay were both charged with insurance fraud, and they both pled guilty. Molly was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Clay was sentenced to 30 years in prison, plus 20 more years for probation violations. Molly has since been paroled, while Clay is still in jail.
First of all, put her back in jail. Second of all, why did they get 30 and 20 years apiece for insurance fraud, but he was only going to get 30 days for sexual assault of a minor? What is going on with our justice system? Capitalism has ruined our country. I'm telling you, this is pure capitalistic greed. I get it. You should go to jail for both. You shouldn't go to jail for literally 30 or freaking 10 times as long for doing something like this. as opposed to doing something that literally ruined a child's life. What is going on in our country? Like, this is messed up. This is not how the system should work. I am upset. Like, seriously though, what's going on with that? Can somebody explain that to me? If anyone is a lawyer watching my channel, somehow, please explain to me why insurance fraud get them so much more time than the sexual assault.
So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode,
jeez.
be sure to check out our.
Thank you, MrBallen. That was a great video, guys. Please like, comment, subscribe to not only this video, because of course you're going to do that because you love me. This is my video. I like making this content, but also make sure you do that for MrBallen. You know, I know he seems like he's doing great, you know, but he really wants you to like that button so much that he told me to tell you to like beat the crap out of his button. Like, you see his like button, you go over there and you stomp on it a couple of times. Just stomp, 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 and then also subscribe and then comment that, you know, another guy told you that his videos were great. But yeah. With that being said, guys, I really appreciate anybody who watches these videos this far. This is especially when I just start like saying anything, so you could hear literally any and everything being said at this part. But what you'll mostly hear me say is thank you for watching, and bye.